Hello and welcome to the Content Advantage, a talk show about content for content professionals. I'm Scott Abel, and with me today is my co-host, Megan Gilhooly.
Hey everyone, I'm Megan with Zoom In Software, and Scott and I are so excited today to have as a guest our friend Ray Gallen, who is the founder of the Transformation Society and the Information 4.0 Consortium. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Well, thanks. I'm really chuffed to be here. Actually, it's looking to be quite a lot of fun. So
very
Excellent.
Nice. And
you clock behind you, by the way. I'm sorry, Megan. We see the clock behind you. What time zone are you in?
I'm in the same time zone as Paris or Madrid or Brussels. I'm in Europe, and I'm actually in the south of France at the moment. Which is one of my two locations, the other being Barcelona.
Very nice.
So what you're seeing behind me is a window into my kitchen.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
People's kitchens, dining rooms, garages, basements on this show. So don't fret. I think you're doing that. Background is perfectly fine. Hey, before we jump into the interview, let me tell our audience that's joining the show now just a few things. During the show, you can ask a question. In fact, you can use the text feature of your computer to ask a question. You'll use the ask a question feature of your webinar viewing panel to text us a question. We won't know who you are unless you add your name. So if you feel inclined to share your name, please go ahead and ask a question and then append it with your name. That way we'll know who asked the question. Additionally, you can access content provided by the presenter and the sponsor today. You can access the attachments and links section to find that content. There's even some troubleshooting information if you're having trouble watching the Bright Talk webinar that you can access from that panel. And on your way out the door, we'd love it if you'd rate the quality of today's conversation using our 1 through 5-star rating system. Keep in mind that if you're watching in full screen mode, you'll need to exit out of that mode in order to participate and ask a question or rate us. And you can also suggest topics or guests for future episodes. There's a little field in the Rate This button that allows you to suggest a topic or leave a comment. You can also use the discount code provided in the attachments and links section to obtain a 50% discount off the entire library of books from one of our partners, XML Press, makes books for information developers, including our latest book from the Content Wrangler, Voice and Tone Strategy by John Caldwell. Hey, and by the way, today's show is brought to you by Zoom In Software. Megan, before we dive into today's topic, can you tell us just briefly what Zoom In Software does?
Yeah, absolutely. So we enable your customers to get answers on your products, and they can do so in any channel that they want with a very unified and personalized experience.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, let's get going. And first of all, Ray, can you just tell us a little bit about your connection to the information development industry?
Yeah, I sort of fell into it, actually. I started out in journalism, doing radio as a radio journalist with the CBC in Canada, NPR in the United States, and some European broadcasters as well. Spent a few years also running the New York City public radio station, which was a great privilege and a thrill. And then at some point, somebody actually said, hey, somebody needs a technical communicator. And I said, what? What's a technical communicator? And so they explained to me, and I went to an interview. And 2 days later, I was working as a technical communicator, doing basically the same thing I did as a journalist. That is, explaining things to people, trying to make complicated things simple, and to help them understand it.
Very nice. Very similar backgrounds to Scott and I. We both come out of journalism.
Sure, we stumbled into journalism ourselves and found our way to communication as well. Hey, and because we promised our audience we'd talk about two things today, ethics and opportunities, I thought we could dive right in. One of the topics that Ray and I and Megan talked about in our pre-call was the fact that artificial intelligence has kind of ushered in new ways of working and made it possible for information developers to use powerful tools to maybe guide content creation, management, translation, even content delivery. Ray, can you provide some examples of how information developers are using artificial intelligence and machine learning today, just as some simple examples?
Well, the first example that comes to my mind is one that probably everybody knows and is using without realizing that they're actually inputting into it. and that is we all speak to whatever our favorite little digital friend is, Alexa or Siri or OK Google, and there's a whole bunch of information that comes out of those devices, and a lot of it is information that we've probably contributed, and it's coming off of the web. So we're in some way we're inputting into that. We're using it, but we're not necessarily inputting into it deliberately for that purpose. On the other hand, we do have tools that we do use in our professional context for things like grammar correction, style, sort of enforced style guides, and so on, that use artificial intelligence to help us actually organize our material, make sure that that we're on brand, that the voice and tone is right, and all of the rest of it. So a lot of you will know tools like Congri or Acrolinks and so on. And probably one of the more interesting ones would be Grammarly, which you can have interface with a lot of different kinds of tools. And what's interesting about Grammarly is that it doesn't use its own artificial intelligence. It sort of parasites on the APIs of other applications, so that it can actually benefit from a wide variety of as it were, points of view. From if an AI can have a point of view, obviously these things are programmed with a certain idea in mind, with a certain intent.
Right.
And so as you go forward and you start using these things, what you get out of Grammarly is a kind of a mashup of all the different places where you might use it, and that's I find that really, really interesting. And probably the more you use it, the more as a human, we get to sort of interpret and process the feedback we get from Grammarly and integrate this sort of wide pattern of different ideas.
Nice. So that speaks to some of the benefits of AI for sure. Where do we start to step into ethical issues with AI?
Well, I think the first one is the thing that we call cognitive bias, which is something I think probably a lot of people have heard of it. There are a few definitions. There's one that Wikipedia has that calls it a systematic pattern of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment. It sounds pretty awful, actually. It says
definition.
Individuals create their own subjective reality from their perception of the input, and that may dictate their behavior in the world more than some sort of objectivity. Now, there's another definition that comes from I think it's the Interactive Design Association. Scott, you know about that one.
Yeah, the Interactive Design Foundation says that it's a cognitive bias is a systematic way in which the context and framing of information influences an individual's judgment and their decision making. And that's really stumpy. So maybe there's a better way we can help the audience understand if they're not tuned into cognitive bias. Ray, can you give us an example of this type of bias that you're aware of?
Yeah. Well, for example, there was a case where an AI deep learning program was being trained to distinguish between wolves and husky dogs.
Yeah.
And as you know, they do have a similar appearance.
Sure.
So after being trained, they did a test to see how well it actually made those identifications, and it identified every picture that it was presented with correctly except one, which was a husky dog that it identified as a wolf. So on investigating, on going further into the sort of deep workings in the algorithm, what they realized was that in the training database, all the pictures of wolves were taken on a snowy background.
Interesting.
And the one picture of a husky that was misidentified was on a snowy background, and it was the only one that was on a snowy background. So somehow the
That's
AI
really interesting.
decided that snow was a characteristic of a wolf,
Right.
which goes
Yeah.
to show the old computer science adage, garbage in, garbage out, still applies, and that we really
Yeah.
have to be careful about what we put in our training databases. Otherwise, what we get out is not going to be useful at all.
That's
Now,
interesting. So I think we can actually flip it and say cognitive bias in, cognitive bias out, right?
oh,
Because
sure.
if you're putting, I actually had a husky dog. She was a husky mix. She got loose once, and a neighbor called 911 saying that there was a wolf rummaging in his trash. It was my dog, right? So
Yeah.
they sent the whole SWAT team out, right, to take care of the wolf. And then I come
So,
running down the street, that's my dog. And the same, so we had a children's book that showed a picture of a wolf. And my kids always said, that's Macy, because it looked very much the same. So you can kind of see how if we aren't very particular with what we put in, and we put our cognitive biases in, then we get cognitive biases out.
And it's very clear. Algorithms are prone to the biases of their creators.
Yes. So that's so yours is a fairly I don't know if it really had a lot of impact on the world, but it's interesting to see the workings. There was an example at Amazon where Amazon decided they were going to automate a lot of their recruitment because they were recruiting tons and tons of people. They wanted to be able to bring in 100 resumes and then have the AI sort out the top 5, and those top 5 would be the ones that they would hire. That was their goal. That was their vision, right? So they brought in 10 years worth of data, meaning resumes of high performers that had moved up the ladder for 10 years. And guess what? It was all men. So basically, the machine said, female, out. And so they had to shut it down. Luckily, there were humans that looked at that and went, whoa, that's not what we wanted, right? But the data coming in was definitely not the outcome that they wanted. So
yeah,
it was
and that's a very good point, that we do need humans to ride shotgun on these things, because they do develop. There was a case of a facial recognition program that identified people of color as chimpanzees, simply because the training database was established by a bunch of young white male programmers who just put in a training database of people who looked like them. They weren't trying to be racist or offensive in any way. They were just not thinking very clearly.
Yeah, they were biased cognitively. And so they put it, that's interesting. So what does that tell you in terms of what content developers should be doing when they come into, I mean, certainly in the future, we're going to be involved in that type of thing. So are there things we should be doing, opportunities for us to, hopefully mitigate some of the cognitive biases that come out?
You bet. Rahel Bailey has a sort of set of things that you can do, and I think it pretty much assumes that you're working in some sort of agile or agile-like situation where the content people do have some input at design phases and at other development phases. So one of the things she said, she has a list. She says, ask who is coding, how it's coded, why it's coded, how are you testing, and how are you closing the loop? Yeah, how are you testing is a very good question.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But we're not trained. We haven't been trained in this way, right? It wasn't in journalism or tech comm or marketing communications. I think maybe newer graduates will be exposed to this, but we weren't. And so
And another thing she says is to insist on certain things, and one of them is team diversity. It would make sense if you have a diverse team, the kind of error that happened to that facial recognition program is less likely to occur. Make sure that you do code and content audits, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just good old basic content strategy 101. Transparency of code and the rationale for all the different factors that go into it. To make sure that, in other words, make sure your code is well documented, including the reasons why.
Yeah.
She also says, insist on involvement of an ethicist. And it's interesting that more and more companies are now hiring people with titles like algorithm ethicist. What I am not sure about yet is to what extent it's eyewash or to what extent it's real. I hope it's real. I mean, I want to believe that it's real and that companies will really listen to what these ethicists say and act accordingly. And of course, examine your data sets, explain with justification why you're using this or that data set, why you're doing this or that thing. In other words, in the end, what we're talking about, I suppose, is a kind of mindfulness, just being aware, raising consciousness amongst your team. And one of the things that I think is true, a lot of times I've heard from people, especially technical communication specialists, but also people in other content professions as well. They say, well, we don't have the power. We don't make the decisions. Why should we be getting involved with this? And I counter with, it's true that in many cases, we don't have the power. But one thing we do have is influence. And we can use that influence, and we can, through this idea of raising consciousness, speaking up when it's important to do so, because there are ethical questions. And in general, we are amongst the few people that actually have a global view. Sometimes even the CEO doesn't have as global a view as we get because of the way that we get our fingers dirty in so many different areas of the company's activity.
That's right. The point. What I hear you saying is that there's like 2 or 3 things we should be aware of if we're in the ethical sphere before we move on to talking about opportunities. So we need to build inclusive teams. We need to start adopting mindfulness and probably leveraging its companion, empathy. And I think you had earlier talked also about the importance of ensuring you had some kind of data-driven checkpoint. What is that?
Yeah. A data-driven checkpoint is very, very important because, as we know, we're very qualitatively driven in the content world, but we also need metrics. We need metrics for one thing, so that our bosses understand what the real value of the content we produce is. If we can show that this or that content, made so and so much money for the company, that shows it as a business asset. Well, we need to be able to apply some sort of metrics to some of these ethical questions too. It's not the only way that we're going to be able to deal with it, far from it. And we need to deal with it on a variety of levels. But somehow we need to be able to say, well, we've done this number of things, we've had this number of tests and so on, and it's come out like that. Some sort of metric, in order to give us a clear idea of where we stand.
Seems like you're also saying this about scrutiny, right? We need to have a little bit of scrutiny about the decisions that we make and the results that occur from them. And sometimes it's not even, it's not front of mind when we're making the decisions that we make, right? The ethical challenges sometimes don't become known to ourselves until after the results are processed and scrutinized. And I respect that. I think that's really good.
And I think mostly we have to have the confidence to be able to stand up and say clearly, if we're saying that African Americans are not human, that's horrible, right? Like that is just absolutely ridiculous. So somebody needs to stand up and raise the flag on that. If we're saying we only hire men, obviously that's not right. Like there's just something about that that's certainly Amazon did not intend. So we need to be able to stand up and say, hey guys, we got a problem. And so I think just having the confidence to be able to stand up and say, I think we have an issue. Let's figure it out.
I know that Ray wants to talk about opportunities next, but I think this is also a really good insertion point to say that it's not really about AI either, the scrutiny. The scrutiny can come in just our regular, ordinary decision making.
Oh, you betcha, sure.
You don't intend to introduce any of these biases, right? I mean, you do introduce bias when you're trying to convert somebody from a prospect to a sale. That's an intent, right? You're trying purposely to do that. I think it's how you go about doing that matters. That bears scrutiny. For example, there's a tax processing software company that's undergoing tons of scrutiny right now for the way that they use the word free, and in an attempt to lure people in and convert them by basically leveraging really great UX text to motivate people toward the goal. And it's open scrutiny, right? And there was not an AI that made those decisions. It was humans. So Megan, I know we want to, before we run out of time, shift here to possibilities. Do you have some questions for Ray about that?
About the tax one. So I think if we have opportunities to scrutinize, are there good ways to do it? Are there bad ways to do it? Can you think of like how you talked about Acrolinks and some of the other tools, how we might, those really, in my mind, kind of use bias to get us to our brand. And so that might be a positive bias, but are there positive and negative? I mean, I know there's like 118 different forms of cognitive bias. Right. So how do you kind of distinguish between those?
Well, some cognitive bias might be adaptive, might even be survival technique. I knew a woman of a certain age who had been through the Second World War, had survived a concentration camp and so on. And she could walk through a poor neighborhood that was absolutely, horrible to look at and not notice it. It was water off her back.
Yeah.
I think that was a survival technique for her. I think she had been through so much in her life that she was just not able to absorb the difficulty of this neighborhood. I might add, by the way, that she would walk through these neighborhoods and nobody would touch her either, because she was so aloof and apart. So there was a survival aspect there, and I think Megan, you alluded to this with tools like Acrolinks and Congri, that what we do when we set them up, when we set up the rules that they work under, is we are trying to create a bias, which is to favor our brand, to have the message be on brand, to follow a certain company style guide and so on. That is also an adaptive cognitive bias that works in our favor. Now, if at the same time that we do that, there are unintentional consequences that don't help us, that's where the scrutiny comes in, and that's where we have to be careful. And I think that's going to be the case. Again, as Scott said, whether it's human cognitive bias we're talking about or the result of an AI. And let's remember also that an AI, at least at the moment, as they exist today, an AI is not going to help ideas evolve in a forward-looking direction, because they're doing statistical analysis of what exists.
The past or the present, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Before we shift to career opportunities, because I think there are some there as well, for the members of the audience who are excited by my friend David Dillon Thomas's new book on cognitive bias, you should know that if you were to wait after the webinar is over and search the brighttalk.com search area for this term, Design for Cognitive Bias, and then use David Dillon Thomas as your search criteria, you will find that there is an hour-long program recorded in November of 2019 where David gave a great presentation on cognitive bias, and he gave some strategies for content people to fight this bias and to understand it better. So definitely check that out in the Bright Talk channel. It's called Design for Cognitive Bias. And I apologize if I could share the URL with you on the screen, I would. Megan, you had asked earlier when we were talking to Ray about career opportunities available to information developers. And I wondered if Ray could give us a few exampmples of the kind of career swap, that
yeah.
Information developer might make.
Well, one of the things that I think is I mean, it's sort of happening to us anyway, is that we are becoming a sort of information orchestrator.
Yes.
And I like this. I like that word, orchestrator, because it means that we're like an orchestra conductor. Also, we're bringing together a lot of stuff that needs to be brought together. So it's bridging silos. And I know, Megan, you've got a great presentation about bridging silos, and and that's exactly what we need to do. We need to connect people who have different specializations, and this is something that we can do because, or it becomes easier for us to do because there are technologies like artificial intelligence and the fallout that's going to happen with the Internet of Things. Once 5G is really in place, we have many more connected objects. We're going to see a lot more of this sort of stuff.
So that's one.
That's one. And another would be to actually go into content engineering, that is designing how these systems are going to work, because AI is going to be crucial, not just in the things that, as part of what we are writing about or documenting or explaining to people, it's also going to be crucial in how our content actually gets delivered to people and how it goes out. When we start talking about personalizing content and making it context sensitive, so that, for example, I'll just give a kind of crude example. If you're really frustrated with a piece of software you're using and you're starting to shout out at it and so on, as can sometimes happen, a bit of facial recognition software recognizes your emotional state, and therefore it gives you the same information it was going to give you anyway, but in a different voice and tone that will help to calm you and to be able to make better use of the information. That kind of stuff. The more that we have that, the more we're going to need people who are engineering how that works and how that gets delivered to people. And what are the conditions that do that?
We've got a couple minutes left. There's 2 roles that you suggested. Are there any others that you could quickly mention that would give people an idea how they might segue their careers?
Well, sure. There's the whole aspect of customer experience and customer satisfaction, the whole user journey, how that's architected, and that includes the whole question of what is the content itself, how it gets delivered, and what is the customer's interaction with all of it, and including a lot of content that's embedded directly in the product, and the product is producing itself. And then there's also the question of being an evangelist for diversity, for ethical content, for, as it were, doing good.
Mm-hmm. The ethnicist that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
That's really good. And before we let Megan take you down the road where you get to say the ta-da moment, which was what we want at the end, so that people feel like they've got some solid advice from this, let's take a few questions from the audience briefly. What are some software that we need to develop skills in to make us more marketable in the AI space as information developers? Ray, do you have any ideas?
Oof. I'm always very dubious about giving the names of software, because I think, first of all, lots of times HR people who say you have to be skilled in such and such a tool.
They don't know what they're at.
Yeah, well, they don't know what we do, so that's a convenient thing for them to latch on to, because they understand that. But we can learn those tools. We can learn them on the job, and we can learn them quickly. What I do think is understand the principles behind things like machine learning, deep learning. You don't have to be a coder. You don't have to learn how to code this stuff. Just learn how it works. Learn it from a descriptive point of view. Learn how APIs work, because a lot of this stuff will function through APIs. Learn about learning theory. Learn about how we acquire knowledge, and a lot of this stuff, again, is not new. It's stuff that we will always have had to do. It's just that there may be a different twist on it.
It also seems like privacy and data security laws are things that are are going to impact us, and as we try to use AI-based platforms. So one of our viewers wants to know, I want Alexa, how do you see current trends in privacy and security impacting the development of AI-based platforms, where I want Alexa to know enough about me to be useful, but not enough to really know me? That's a great question.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
That is a great way of describing it. That's exactly what I want too. I'm not sure we can get that, but as you know, the European Union has got its GDPR regulation, and that has helped, but it's very far from being perfect. I attended a webinar recently on the use of predictive AI in the legal profession, which went into some very scary possibilities based around what one lawyer refers to as outcome thinking, and using predictive algorithms based on previous court decisions. And this comes back to the question that if that becomes the general practice, law is not going to evolve, because it's always going to be backward looking. How did they do this in the past?
The other hard part about that particular question is that our own cognitive biases as humans means that the person who asked that has a different definition of what's enough but not too much than you have, or
yes.
I have, right?
Yes.
And so there is no good definition, because we all have our own definition. So how's the law going to keep up with that?
Right.
So
and these words that we use are squishy, right? Like, I've also heard it's the same question but phrased a little differently. How can we make the talking devices that I can't name by name because I keep turning them on? How do we make them able to know us enough but not seem creepy? Okay, great. I am a judge. What is creepy?
Right.
Like,
how do you define that?
Yeah,
right.
Judge Potter in the United States argument, I know it when I see it, but that's not good enough. We have to be able to clearly define, articulate what to do and what not to do. So here's the last question, Bray. We're running out of time, and then Megan will close the show with her questions. What's your best suggestion for those of us who teach ethics to content strategy students? What should we be focusing on?
Alors, first of all, I'm really delighted to hear that there is somebody who is teaching ethics to content strategy students.
Yeah.
Because I'm not aware of too many programs that have a class in ethics. So bravo if that's what you're doing. Absolutely delighted to hear that. I would say to concentrate on what are the actual things that that can go wrong, and how we can fix them, and also to have a view to the prospective. That is, we need to solve immediate problems, and most of us are in a day-to-day kind of operational mode, but also to look at what's coming down the pipe and anticipating ethical questions that can be raised by what's coming down the pipe, and to talk about how can we approach the designers and the coders and the people who are thinking about and imagining these products, and get in there early enough that we can avoid some sort of ethical crisis further down the line. We probably won't avoid all of them, but we can avoid a lot of them and just make all of this stuff a lot easier and a lot less scary.
Right. We don't want to create more problems. That kind of is a great segue for Megan, who had a question about problems.
Yeah, so we spoke the other day about, if you're not part of the solution on this, you're part of the problem. And so you kind of answered how you jump into that, but I think that's a good opportunity to say, how do we make sure we're part of the solution? And can you sort of summarize, just like bullet point, 1, 2, 3 things people that are in our audience today can do right away to just make sure that they're at least, if not becoming part of the problem, but also maybe working towards the solution here?
Well, I think we're developing what I refer to as a hybrid culture, where we interact with machines and we're indifferent to the fact that they're machines. It's not that we don't know, it's we don't care. And I think that's fine. In fact, I think it's kind of fun. But it's very important that we keep in mind, what do machines do best? And leave that to them. What do they do better than we do? Every time humans try to imitate machines, they do a lousy job of it.
Yeah, that's true.
And what is the domain of humans and that machines should be kept out of? And what do humans do better than machines? Things like creativity, things like dealing with the unexpected. I'll give you just a very quick example. Most aviation experts will tell you that most air accidents are due to human error, and that machines fly airplanes way better than humans do, and more reliably and more safely. But no machine, no matter how intelligent, in quotes, it is, would ever have thought to land a plane on the Hudson River.
Right.
It's a great, that's a good point.
Great example. Oh, Ray, thank you so much for helping us understand this subject in such a short time. I know you have tons more to say about it. And for those of you who are interested in what Ray is speaking about and the kinds of activities that he thinks information developers should be participating in the future, you can check the attachments and links section of our webinar viewing panel to get a link directly to some of the websites that document what Ray's working on, and also his LinkedIn profile, so you can reach out and contact him. There's also some content there about some of the subjects that we brought up today, including a couple of links to videos and useful little short tutorials that could help you understand some of the topics like cognitive bias. Before you sign off, we'd love it if you'd let us know what you thought of today's show. Use the Rate This tab located in your webinar viewing panel, and you can give us a 1 through 5-star rating, with 5 being a high rating. There's also a little field that you can type a short comment that you'd like to share with Ray or to the producers of today's show. Also, don't forget to check your inbox for an invitation to our next The Content Advantage show, which you're not going to want to miss. June the 21st, on a Tuesday, we're going to chat with Val Swisher of Content Rules about the personalization paradox, which is the subject of her upcoming book from XML Press, but it's also an extremely interesting topic for information developers. And speaking of XML Press, don't forget to check out their 50% off offer in the attachment section. You can buy any of their ebooks for half off through the month of August, I believe. So we've got a pretty good couple of weeks to check out their library. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thanks to Megan and thanks to Ray. Until we see you again, stay safe, be well, and keep doing great work.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Ray. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoomin. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoominsoftware.com.